Hello, darling, I come in. Of course, that is what you can see. That I wanna give you a kiss. That I wanna dance a little bit. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. That no one can against me. Just give me your hand. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against me. That we're gonna spin. Of course, darling. That is what you can say, that we're gonna spin. Of course, darling, we're gonna smoke some cigarettes. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. You know, I'm in charge. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against me. That this snow is black. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That even black snow. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. You want a spaceship. Of course, darling, you wanna steal the money from the parallel universe screen. Of course, darling, come with me. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against me. That I want my pirate ship. Of course, darling, you know I'm pure energy. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I drink what I have to drink. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I keep beautiful and clean. Of course, darling, that is what you can say. That we're in black snow here. Of course, darling, so come on with me. That is what you can say. That no one can against me. Of course, that is what you can say. That no one can against me. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I will fight for. Of course, darling, but let's them there. Of course, darling, I can share. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against me. Of course, darling, that is what you can say. So come on. Of course, darling, you know I'm in charge. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. That I steal more than energy. Of course, darling, I steal a lot of money. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm here in the jacuzzi. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm in the jacuzzi, smoking some cigarettes and drinking some champagne. Of course, darling, that is what you can have when I come inside. But crazy light, and that is what you can have. That no one can against me. That I'm so fun. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm here in the jacuzzi and drinking some cigarettes and smoking some champagne. And you know I'm insane, but I love you like that. Of course, darling, I'm the crazy light. Of course, darling, I'm the light in the darkness. I'm the crazy. I'm still in energy. That is what you can see. That no one can against me. Of course, darling, you know we are in black snow. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm in the jacuzzi, smoking some cigarettes and drinking some champagne. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm still crazy, insane. That I'm the light. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That no one can against me. That I'm pure black snow. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm spinning around. You know I'm gonna smoke some cigarettes because I'm on charge, darling. That is what you can have. That I'm here in the case. Of course, darling, wearing roses red and hallowed and which roses. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm here in black snow. Of course, in my spaceship. That is what you can see. Stealing some energy. That is what you can have here. So come on, darling. That is what you can have. That I'm pure bling bling. Of course, darling, I steal more than energy. I steal the whole money. That is what you can have from me. So come on. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I go, that I'm crazy, that I'm in the light. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. I am so high, and who is gonna carry me out. Of course, no one can. So come on. So that is what you can have. So what are you gonna say? Of course, darling, that is what you can have from me. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm so damn high, and who is gonna carry me out? No one, of course. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm hearing black snow, that I'm pure white, that is what you can have. That no one can against me, that I'm hearing black snow. Of course, darling, I'm gonna press the gas. That is what you can have, that no one can have. Nothing from me, of course, that is what you can say, that I'm here, of course, darling, that is what you can say, that no one can against me. So come on, of course, I'm still crazy high, and who is gonna carry me out? No one. Of course, that is what you can have, that I'm so damn high. Of course, darling, that is what you can say, that I'm pure bling bling, that I steal more than energy, that I steal the whole money. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that we are in black snow. Of course, darling, and I'm smoking some cigarettes and drinking some champagne in the jacuzzi. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, you know that I'm stealing energy like crazy because I'm the light in the darkness. That is what you can have, so come on, of course, darling, that I'm stealing energy, but I steal more than energy. I steal the whole money and pure bling bling. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that I have everything I have, that I have everything I want. Of course, that is what you can say, that no one can against me, that I earn my money. That is what you can say, that no one can against me. Of course, darling, I have no one counting. That is what you can have, that I'm here with everything I want. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that I'm here smoking some cigarettes and drinking some champagne in the jacuzzi. That is what you can say, so come on with me. Of course, darling, you know I'm pure black snow. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. Let's go.
Eureka Beats.
Of course, darling, I come in, no one can against me. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm here with my eyes wide open. Of course, darling, I'm in the range with my eyes wide open. Of course, darling, which one of them do you want? Of course, darling, which car do you want? I'm so high, I'm gonna drive. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I have all my bitches counting. That is what you can have from me. Of course, darling, I declared money. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I have Kenya full of checks. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm here with what I want. Of course, I'm in black snow with Kenya full of checks. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm gonna arrive. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. You keep my money. Of course,
Eureka
darling, that is
Beats.
what you can say, that no one can against me. You keep my money. I'm gonna try that they don't stop me in the past. Of course, that is what you can have, that no one can against me, that I'm here with black snow, and no one can against me. Of course, darling, that is what you can have. You can have some money if you want. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against me. So come on, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against me. That I'm so fine, that I'm pure black snow. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against me. That I'm here. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that I'm pure black snow, that I have Kenya full of checks, that that no one can against me. That we are here in Wich roses, and we are here in Wich roses and hallowed, of course, darling, that is what you can have. Rodeo, of course, darling, that is what you can have. And pure blacks now that I have getting full of checks. You keep my money and we're gonna do with our spreadsheets some energy. That is what you can say, so come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have from me. That I have everything around here, that I'm so crazy. That I'm the light in the darkness, that is what you can see from me when I come around and make some checks. Of course, darling, I have getting full of checks. I'm pure blacks now, of course, darling, that is what you can have. You keep my money, of course, darling, that is what you can have. That you keep my money, of course, darling, that is what you can have. You keep my money, that I'm gonna arrive and I'm gonna try that they don't put me in jail before I arrive. That is what you can see, of course, darling, that is what you can have. That I'm here smoking some cigarettes and drinking some champagne in the jacuzzi. That is what you can see, that I'm gonna give you some white roses so you can choose, of course, darling. That is what you can have, that no one can against me. So come on, of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against me. That I'm gonna give you some white roses, of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against me. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against me.
Eureka Beats.
Of course, darling, you keep my money, we're gonna share. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against me. Of course, that I'm still crazy, that I'm the light in the darkness. Of course, you keep my money because we are gonna have some checks. Of course, darling, that is what you can have, that no one can against me. That I'm smoking some cigarettes and drinking some champagne in the jacuzzi. Of course, that is what you can have from me. Of course, darling, that we're gonna share. That is what you can have, that no one can against me. That we have everything we want. Of course, darling, that is what you can see. That I have everything I want. I'm pure blacks now. That I have Kenya pure checks, count, and done. Of course, that is what you can have. That no one can against me. Keep my money, we're gonna steal some